Welcome to The Pick List, the podcast for curious food industry minds. I'm Julia Glotz, a writer, editor and consultant specialising in food and drink. Every week, I'm joined by an expert guest to discuss the news, trends and developments shaping food and grocery retail right now. You'll get a personal perspective on how business leaders and leading thinkers from different parts of our industry are making sense of the big issues. My guests will also share what's on their personal reading list, bringing you a curated selection of thought-provoking articles from the trade press, national media, and other titles. You can find links to all the articles and suggestions for further reading in the episode show notes and also on thepicklist.co.uk. Now let's start the show. Hello and welcome to episode 52 of The Pick List. I hope you're having a good week. My guest this episode is Laura Harnett, founder and CEO of Seep, a brand of sustainable household essentials. Laura used to be a buyer. She also worked as a consultant for many years and for retailers, including Selfridges. And she decided to launch her brand after getting annoyed with the lack of plastic-free options in the household essentials aisle. Because, as you will hear Laura explain, eco-friendly cleaning products are a growing market, but if you want to buy plastic-free versions for things like cleaning cloths and sponges or scourers, well, actually you still don't have many options. So Laura is on a mission to change that. And I think you'll find it super interesting to hear how she plans to do that, how she's adapting to the challenges of running a challenger brand after working for big organisations for a long time. We also talk a lot about sustainability in general, as you might expect, and Laura shares how she's approaching carbon offsetting for her brand, what it's like to be publicly challenged by consumers on your sustainability claims, and her take on Black Friday promotions as a sustainable brand. So that's coming up in a moment, but first let me bring you up to speed on some of the big stories in food and grocery retail this week. Marks & Spencer has struck a deal with Costa to start providing sandwiches and hot food for the coffee chain from next year. M&S will be providing around 30 items to more than 2,500 Costa outlets, including children's food, hot meal boxes and salads. Sainsbury's has teamed up with Amazon to open a checkout-free store in Holborn in London. The store is called Smart Shop Pick and Go. It's currently open to staff already, and it will open to the public later this month. It will use the same technology as Amazon Fresh checkout-free stores. Premier Foods is trialling its Mr. Kipling brand in Canada and now plans to expand into the US. The company will initially focus on cake snack pack slices in North America, but could expand the range later. It already sells cakes in Australia. Shares in Oatly took a hit after the oat drink brand cut its revenue outlook due to supply chain and technical problems. The company also said growth in some regions had been slower than expected in the wake of COVID, but that it believed this was a temporary issue. Also hit by supply chain problems were Greggs vegan sausage rolls. The company said there were some temporary interruptions to supply that could affect some of its products getting to stores, including those very famous vegan sausage rolls. Israeli company Redefine Meat has launched 3D printed plant-based meat products in the UK. The products are made with ingredients such as soya and pea protein, but they're printed using 3D technology, which allows for more varied and realistic texture. The products will be available in restaurants initially, including Marco Pierre White's chain of steakhouses. Morrisons unveiled its Christmas TV ad campaign, which this year highlights the hard work of British farmers. The ad is called Farmer Christmas and also draws attention to the work of supermarket workers and food producers. And finally, in other Christmas campaign news, more than 1,500 complaints have been lodged with the Advertising Standards Authority over Tesco's Christmas TV ad this year. In the ad, which has the theme "This Christmas, Nothing's Stopping Us," Santa is shown holding up his COVID vaccine passport at border control. Complainants to the advertising watchdog said the scene was coercive and encouraged medical discrimination. These are some of the big headlines in food and grocery retail this week. You can find links to all the stories in the show notes and also on thepicklist.co.uk. And now, here's my conversation with Laura Harnett. Laura, welcome to the Picklist. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to chatting.
I'm excited to have you on the show. Now, you are CEO of Seep, a brand of sustainable plastic-free cleaning products. And when I first came across your brand, I thought, oh, of course, green household and cleaning products. I know that's a big trend. But you are not doing cleaning products in the sense of sprays or washing detergents. You want to provide green alternatives for what you describe as the least sexy part of the cleaning aisle: sponges, scourers, cloths, bin liners. Where did that idea come from? What made you go, I'm going to be the woman to make sustainable bin liners happen?
Yeah, it's not the most obvious choice, is it? And that's why I really hesitated for a really long time to do it. The story most founders tell is my story. I'm a fairly sustainable shopper. I'm eco-conscious, but I'm not an eco-warrior. So I won't go above and beyond to lots of different stores to buy my products. I want to try and buy them in one place. And in my trolley, I had, organic products, recycled toilet paper, washing up liquid, and I was just kind of pushing my way down that kind of the grimmest of aisles, which is the household essentials aisle. I mean, it's never even called anything. It's, sometimes it says bin liners or something at the top. And I just scoured to try and see, is there anything that's not made of plastic here? And everything I looked at was plastic without any exception. And so I was quite puzzled. I just thought, there must be some alternatives here, whether it's a washing up brush, whether it's a cloth. And I just didn't understand why. And so that was what sort of put the sort of seed in my head for Seep. And then I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I did my research. I think there's quite a few brands out there, but you really have to search quite hard to find them. And they look quite eco, and so that isn't always the right way to get into the mainstream if you look very eco. And I just thought, right, well, some of the brands that are there at the moment in that aisle are, it's brands like Spontex and Brillo and Vileda, great brands that have grown and have built businesses, but there wasn't the challenger brand in that aisle that you can see in every other part of the supermarket in all of those aisles. And so I just thought, there must be some reason why someone else hasn't done it. Is it the margins are rubbish? Is it because these products, it's impossible to find these products? And, every time I'd sort of looked into it, there wasn't a really obvious reason. And so, I kind of got over the bit about, actually, do I want to be known as the bin lady and sponge lady? which is one of these, it's a consideration, going, if you're at a networking event, I can't do that. And then I just got over it. I just thought, this is a fantastic opportunity, and it's a way I can make an impact, is to bring people better products and to bring them into the mainstream. And so that's why I decided to set up Seep.
I absolutely love it. And so when did you go live with the products then?
The idea came to me in about 2019, just after I left Selfridges. I sat on it for the best part of a year and a half, and it was during lockdown. I think there's going to be so many businesses that have been created in this time, and it just created the space for me to really to pull together a business plan, to do the research, and to really see if I could make a go of it. And it was end of May 2020 that I registered the business, and then we launched in November. So that's when we went live with our first two products, which was a sponge and a cloth.
And how big is your product range now?
So we are up to 10 products now. And we did, we did a survey right at the beginning, before we even launched, to say, of these, so you can imagine that whole aisle, there are just so many different products, and actually getting any kind of Mintel data or, it's very difficult when you're a startup or a very small business. It's expensive, and actually some of them, it's very hard to pull that data together. And so we just asked customers, and they I asked not just what do you use, but what do you replace most often. And those green topped scourer sponges was number one, and number two was the cloths, all of the kind of J cloths and that sort of thing. So those were our first two products.
And how are you distributed now? Is it all still through your website, D2C, or are you in retail as well?
So we started D2C on our own website, which for anyone who's done it, you set up your own website with a Shopify account, and you get these first kind of cha-chings when you first sell some, and it's such an exciting moment. But so we started on D2C. We launched in Amazon, and we have some stockists. So places like Bauer Collective, Good Club, Bother, and then we launched in Selfridges a couple of months ago as well. So the idea is we build across those three channels, and ultimately, I want to be where people are shopping most frequently, which is in their weekly shop in their supermarket.
And you've already mentioned that you used to work at Selfridges, so I think it's worth diving into your career in a little bit more detail. So you were at Selfridges for several years, you were at Kingfisher, you worked as a consultant for Deloitte and Booz. Just tell us a bit about that part of your career. What was your specialism? What types of projects would you typically work on?
So right at the beginning of my career, I was a buyer for Compass Group, so in the food service sector, and I used to read The Grocer. That was the main publication that would hit my desk. And my first ever category was tinned fish, excluding tuna.
Very specific.
Very specific, because tuna was too strategic and I couldn't be trusted with tuna. So it was like pilchards and salmon and and so that was fantastic. I was there for 4 years. Every year I got a bigger category and ended up with kind of crisps and snacks and branded products. And then I just wanted more variety. So I think as a buyer, you kind of, there's a very clear path that you step through. And I just wanted a more variety. I wanted to understand a wider set of skills and business. And so I went into consulting for the best part of a decade. And there it was all consumer and retail. So, places like IKEA and Boots and B&Q. And that would be anything from, category management projects to turnaround projects, transformation projects, due diligence projects. So, it's fairly well known. Consultants come in and they take your watch and tell you what time it is. And I think to some extent that's that can be true, but it's just the best learning opportunity. You see inside all of these businesses, you really understand how to make change happen. And you understand so many different sectors and aspects. So, but it's not great for family life. And so I was, traveling a lot. And so then I left to head up the strategy team at Kingfisher and at B&Q. And then I was still traveling quite a bit. And so Selfridges, which is kind of iconic in retail sector, in the retail sector. A lot of the projects I had been doing in retail were all about, cutting the store base, cutting costs, those relentless projects. And for Selfridges, it was just all about growth, customer experience, the kind of magic of retail. And so that's what I went and did for 4.5 years. I was the chief of staff there, and then headed up our transformation project, which was a big investment in digital. So again, just fabulous brand, really understanding how a brand should be managed. And then towards the end of that, I had breast cancer, and that I think just gets you to go, I've got the second part of my career. What do I want to do with it? And I think that's what, that was the trigger. And I think, that's what essentially led to me setting up Seep.
Wow. And how did you find that transformation, going from working in big businesses, for big brands, to suddenly being a founder and being in charge of a challenger brand?
It is like night and day. I had a bit of a transition because I started doing some angel investing while I was at Selfridges, with a sort of female, so an angel network syndicate that back female founders, and that just gave me a sort of glimpse into how different startup life was compared to corporate life, and how much faster decision making has to be, how much easier it is to change things. A website digital project in Selfridges would take months, if not years. We launched our Shopify site after a few days, and so it's been, I think that made the transition a little bit easier, but it's a very different way. You think, I thought I'd seen it all, but actually it's very different in a small brand. And cash is everything. You don't really have to worry about that quite so much when you're in a big organization. And you're doing everything, from fixing the printer and trying to get products cleared at the ports through to raising money. You're doing everything. So it's been a bit of a period of adjustment.
Yeah. Are you enjoying it though? Is this something that you're finding is allowing you to be more creative and more flexible than you were perhaps able to be before?
Julia, that is honestly, the sort of creativity, is just fantastic. You come up with an idea, I've got a small team, and they tell me I've got, most of my ideas are pretty rubbish, my creative ideas, but actually some of them aren't that bad. And there was just very little scope to do that in a corporate sector. You have your kind of area of responsibility. For me, I was running fairly large teams, and a lot of my job was getting big decisions through board. So whereas here, just you can try things, they can not work, and it's fine. And I love it. I absolutely love it. It's scary as well, especially if it's your own business and your own money and reputation. But I wouldn't change anything.
Now, given your interest in sustainability, you've brought along some really interesting sustainability-focused articles for us to talk about. Before we jump into those, you've already talked about the fact that back when you were at Compass, you, of course, used to read The Grocer, about all those fantastic tinned fish category reports. But tell me a bit about your reading habits now. What publications do you read on a regular basis, and what kinds of stories get your attention?
So I read, I still read, I've gone back to reading The Grocer after a while of not reading it. I've gone back to reading it. And so that's definitely something that hits my front door mat every Friday. I love Wired magazine. It just opens your mind to things that you don't come across in other publications. It gets you to think more deeply about things. Especially in the world of tech and sort of future trends. And I read The Guardian. I think quite a few of your podcast hosts seem to read The Guardian as well. But that's
especially
fantastic.
The more sustainability focused ones, I find. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's just fantastic content we share. We can share articles really easily, which I love. And then I read for pleasure. I read fiction and something that is a good bit of escapism to help me unwind at the end of the day.
Fantastic. Now let's talk about your first article, and it is from The Guardian, in fact, and the headline is about 26,000 tonnes of plastic COVID waste pollutes world's oceans. And just for listeners, for a bit of context here, this is reporting on a new Chinese study that's looked at just how much PPE waste linked to the pandemic, so things like masks and single-use gloves, has been generated since the start of the pandemic. And what those researchers found is that an estimated 8.4 million tonnes of plastic waste have been generated from 193 countries. 46% of that comes from Asia, followed by Europe and then North and South America. And it's primarily hospitals, actually, rather than individual citizens that are responsible for the vast bulk of that waste. And perhaps most worryingly, in an article that's full of quite worrying statistics, the researchers predict that by the end of this century, their modelling suggests that almost all the pandemic-associated plastic will end up either in the seabed or on beaches. Laura, what made you pick this article?
It's that last sentence. Almost all of it will end up in beaches, or in the ocean. And I think, especially in the UK, we think, especially for those that recycle, and a lot of us recycle, we think that it all gets treated and magically either gets turned into other bottles or gets incinerated, or it gets kind of neatly tucked away. And that's just not the case. It's lasting. It lasts hundreds of years, and a lot of it does end up as fugitive. It's called fugitive plastic. It escapes the systems we have, and it finds its way into ecosystems. And I just don't think people know that and realize that. And so that's why I picked this article. And I think the other reason I picked it was, I think a lot of us were making, as individuals, quite good progress before COVID, including me. I had my coffee cup, I was taking it into kind of Pret every day. And I just think it's been really tough to keep that up. Lots of places didn't accept it. And so I think there has been a bit of a slip back to some old habits. And that's why, I wanted us to talk about it, because I think there now needs to be a kind of collective effort to get back on it, really, and to try and reduce our use of single use, all types of plastic, really.
Absolutely. And the point you make there about how certain bad habits slipped back in during the pandemic really resonated with me, because I think it's not just around single-use plastic, it's around food waste as well, where, at the start of the pandemic, there were lots of great intentions, and then, as people sort of stopped scratch cooking perhaps quite so much and went back to more convenient options, some of those habits crept back in. What do you think it will take to get consumers to re-engage, particularly with an issue like plastic, which is very high profile? But I wonder sometimes whether there's almost a kind of plastic fatigue sometimes setting in, because it's so prominent. What do you think would help to make people look at their plastic use afresh?
There are a few schemes that are being looked at the moment. One of the things we're going to be talking about later is carbon offsetting, and something that people are already starting to do is plastic offsetting. So where people are using plastic, how can you offset that? And typically that works where you'll take, if you can't use anything except plastic, so for example in fresh produce, then you will take the same quantity of plastic out of the ecosystem. So and I think if you're doing that adds cost, and therefore people will find a way, suppliers, retailers will find a way to avoid that. And I think we have a lovely set of customers at Seep, and because we're sustainable, and I think it happens to a lot of sustainable brands, people are very vocal on our posts, and we get a lot of pushback about, look, why are your products more expensive? And they are. If you look at a set of 12 sponges from Wilko's or from Tesco's, you can buy them for £1 or £2, whereas ours are roughly about £2 for a sponge. And the challenge is that while there's that disparity, people will not switch. It's just too expensive for many people to switch. But I hope that the next step will be, as more people, as volumes grow, as more people switch, the people that pricing will come down, the cost will come down. We'll find new innovations that allow us to bring better priced products to people that are genuinely as cost effective as plastic. But that is the main, that's the biggest issue right now. It's just so cheap. And I think until there's that kind of disparity, it's going to be very difficult to fully address it.
What's the biggest driver of that disparity or that premium for your products? Is it largely a question of scale? You're a challenger brand, you're up against, much, much bigger brands, or are there specific raw materials in your products that are especially expensive in comparison with plastic?
Yeah, so it's the raw materials and the way it's made, and so for those of you who haven't seen the sponges, so our sponges are the bottom sponge is made of cellulose, so it's wood pulp that's treated in a way to make it look and feel like a sponge, and it kind of is compostable at the end of using it, which is about a month. And then so that replaces the bottom bit of sponge, and then the scourer bit at the top has been really tricky to find, and the best we've got so far is a piece of loofah, which some people we get some kind of really ranty people on our posts sometimes who say, but you're killing the baby sea sponges, and loofah isn't baby sea sponge, it's actually a vegetable that grows on a vine, which is quite nice to then share with them. But that loofah then is then attached to the sponge at the bottom. And if you're really plastic free and compostable, you can't use glue, because then it stops it from composting. And actually, there are some compostable glues, but actually, if you're using them underwater, they start separating. So it's quite a tricky thing to do. And so the only way to do it is to stitch the two together. And so, you've got I know. So if you've got a product like that, so our Seep sponges last roughly a month, probably more. At the end of it, they look a bit tatty. You can put them in the washing machine and they wash, but then you can cut them up and put them in your compost heap and it disappears. But it costs a couple of pounds. You've then got the plastic version, which, probably costing you 10, 20p. It looks pretty tatty after a while, but it's incredibly cheap. You're producing it in industrial quantities, and you can't use recycled plastics to produce this. It's all made of virgin plastic, and at the end, all you can do is put it in the bin because you can't recycle it. And so there's just an inherent cost in that plastic version that the true cost of it isn't really reflected in the product price. But it's not everybody that can afford £2 on a plastic sponge. So at some point, as volumes grow and as technology advances, we've got better materials, we'll hopefully then be able to find a way to bring those costs down.
It's fascinating, and I hadn't thought of the glue at all, which just shows you start looking at creating more sustainable options, and it's a sort of Pandora's box of things that you suddenly have to deal with. I was so interested in what you were saying though about consumer engagement as well, and some of the really tough questions that you get, because as you say, your customers are more sustainability aware, so they really care. They want to support brands that are getting this right, and they ask really tough questions. How have you found that, and what's your approach to responding to people who are perhaps calling you out or asking tough questions in a public forum?
Yeah, it's quite tough to get used to initially, because we try our hardest. Everything we do, we really review how we're doing it and can we do it better. And I think I love getting comments back. It allows us to talk about the way we do things and why we do it in a certain way. But there's a sort of minority, they really hammer you and, very publicly. And I'm sure lots of eco brands, sustainable brands are the same, and that's what makes it so hard, so our policy is always to be transparent and try and respond to as much as we possibly can. We try and put as much as we can on our website. So one really common question we get is, where are your products made? And so, and the answer for that is that they're made in lots of different areas. So, our bin liners are coming from Europe, our larger sponges are coming from the UK, and our scourer sponges are coming from China. And that is really contentious for some people. And we've had to, but I'm transparent about it. This is where they come from, and we talk about why they come from China. And I think that's all we can do, is to be transparent, explain our rationale, and then it's up to them to make a decision about whether they're okay with that. But it's something that I think you get more of that backlash, I think, nearly as a sustainable brand than you do as a traditional brand.
Yeah, I can imagine that must be really tough, actually, because as you say, I think transparency is the only way through that. And if people are asking questions, you need to answer those questions. And I suppose there's the person who asked the question who may then decide they don't want to buy your scourers because they're from China or whatever. But other consumers who are less aggressive are seeing you respond in a public forum as well. And it might actually make them feel more confident in your brand. But yeah, no one's asking those types of questions of the plastic sponges. So it's by being the eco brand and by being the more sustainable option that you end up putting yourself in the firing line.
Yeah. And you're being held to, I think it's fair enough. You're holding yourself up to a higher standard.
Of course.
And you should be able to defend that. I mean, I think the best thing is when we see customers respond to each other. And so often we get something, someone having a rant about it, potentially, had the cost of it. And then another customer will come in without us even intercepting, saying, but, the reason why it's more expensive is because, it's the true cost isn't reflected in the plastic version. And that's just fantastic. It's other people who are, supporting you and understand your logic that, and that's better than us going back to them.
Absolutely. Now, I want to bring us on to carbon offsetting. You've already mentioned that this is something that we were going to talk about. And I think it ties in quite nicely, actually, with what you've just talked about and about being transparent and answering tough questions from consumers. So this is an article that I've picked from the Times. And the headline is, "What is carbon offsetting? The new advances explained." And as the headline suggests, this is basically an explainer article that sets out how carbon offsetting works, but particularly explains some of the controversy around offsetting. Why is there so much debate around it? Why are some campaigners and people really opposed to offsetting? It points out that it used to be quite poorly regulated, for example, and there are still some issues around how offsetting claims are policed. But it also explains that the industry is trying to get tougher on claims, become more user-friendly, make it easier for consumers to understand what carbon offsetting means in an individual context. Because as I'm sure we'll go on to talk about, carbon offsetting isn't carbon offsetting. There are lots of different variations here and lots of different approaches. The reason I wanted to talk to you about this is because I saw a really interesting article on your company blog about offsetting and your own approach to offsetting. And that article was called The Cynic's Guide to Offsetting, where you explain how you work with On a Mission, which is a Swiss charity, on your own offsetting. And you mentioned in that introduction to the article that you had some questions from consumers about your own approach to offsetting. Tell me a little bit about that. What kinds of questions were you getting and what made you decide to write an article like this explaining your approach to offsetting?
Yeah, and this is a great example of when I love our customers getting in touch with us. It gives us, it pushes you to ask tough questions, to review what you're doing. And this is a really good example of it. So we were getting questions like, carbon offsetting's just a cop out. You should be reducing your. It's just a good excuse. How do you know that the trees are really being planted? Didn't you know? I think Greta did a sort of a program on BBC about it takes 10 years for a tree to start sequestering carbon, and so we had lots of comments around that time around it's just pushing it into the future and you never know if it happens. So all of those. And actually I was like, oh, actually these are really good questions and I should know the answer. If I'm partnering with On a Mission, I'm assuming they've got a really good set of answers, and actually I'd love to share that with our customers. And so we talked to Fred, and Fred is the founder of On a Mission. His background is as a reforestation engineer, and so he's seen it from the kind of big commercial offsetting schemes point of view. And he from that, he set up on a mission, and he just answered. He was very straight up, and he answered all of the questions that we set to him that our customers had asked.
And what response did you get from customers? Did people sort of appreciate or acknowledge that we were trying to answer those the questions they had?
Not really. I think a lot of the content we put out that is about sustainability and about informing, sort of deeper articles, just get read less. That's just the reality. You post something that is, lovely household contents and a lovely kitchen, those get much more engagement. And then the articles like this, which actually you tend to get less engagement. But I think people do, they do read them, and it backs up who you've chosen as your charity partner and the way to offset. And I think it lends kind of deeper credibility to the business. And so even if lots of people haven't read it and haven't come back to us, I think it's still the right thing to do.
Absolutely. And I guess, as you said, it raised questions within your organisation as well. So even just going through the process of saying, we want to be able to tell this story really clearly, that has, benefits in and of itself, doesn't it?
Definitely. And I think the main takeaway from the article really was that, we chose on a mission because of the way they operate. They operate with smaller projects, so not on big commercial scale that some of the big airlines offsetting schemes work. And we pay probably double the amount per tree than those schemes do. But the projects that on a mission they very carefully select the projects based on how well they're governed, and the impact they're having, not just on planting trees, but on local, on biodiversity and local livelihoods. And so it means that they're a much more sustainable project long term. And for us, that was just really important that they were going to be supported by the communities they were in.
What did you make of the Times article then? Because it's sort of, it takes you on a bit of a journey, doesn't it? On the one hand, it points out that the industry is starting to be regulated more, and the debate is moving on. But it ends on quite a pessimistic tone, I thought, in sort of saying that actually it still remains quite confusing and quite difficult for consumers to really have confidence in various offsetting schemes. What was your take? What did you take from it?
I agree. I think it wasn't a very optimistic ending, and I think there was another article that Paul Hargreaves maybe shared.
Yes, from the BBC.
Exactly. Seven ways to spot greenwashing, and I thought that was, and one of those was a carbon offsetting scheme, and I thought that was really harsh, actually. So, in any carbon offsetting scheme that a business is running, the first thing should be, have they tried to reduce their footprint as much as possible first? That has to be the first thing. So are they air freighting? Are they looking at their delivery, final mile delivery? Are they looking at the products they're developing? Have they optimized all of that? And that should be a journey, and they should be able to talk about that. And then of the carbon footprint they've got left, then surely carbon offsetting is better than not doing it at all. And so, I think that article was overly pessimistic, and I think that the tip to consumers should be understand more broadly what suppliers are doing and what retailers are doing to reduce their footprint, and then when they're offsetting, how are they offsetting? What's the scheme they've picked? Have they picked a massive, great big scheme where they're planting hectares and hectares of one single tree in Mozambique for the cheapest possible price? Or are they investing in genuinely biodiverse, sustainable projects? And so, those would be the tips and the hope for the future that this is it's going to have to be part of the solution.
It really puts a lot of onus on consumers, though, doesn't it, to make sense of those claims. And I when I spoke to Paul about that article last week, I agreed that it was quite tough or quite harsh to say the minute you see someone talk about carbon offsetting, it's a sign of greenwashing. But I can kind of see where they're coming from, because I do think there are companies that are using carbon neutral as a kind of, stamp of approval, nothing to see here, moving on. And I wonder whether we perhaps need to question that the use of that terminology, because there will be some consumers, people like your customers, who are super engaged on sustainability, who will do the research and who will look into individual claims, but not many people will do that. There must be a way to make it more intuitive and easier for consumers to understand on what basis people are claiming to be carbon neutral, increasingly carbon negative now as well.
Yeah, and it's a very confusing. So we're carbon negative. We offset our footprint 3.5 times, but very few people understand what that means. So we don't really talk about it. It doesn't mean, for most people, it doesn't mean anything. I think one of the things that, so On a Mission, Fred, who runs On a Mission, is also working on it's kind of a protocol, an open protocol, which is a way of exactly tackling the problem you're describing. So how do you get a really common standard out there that everyone can understand? And some of the kind of accreditation schemes are so expensive that it's only the really large ones that can qualify for them. So it means that a lot of the smaller schemes don't qualify for them. And so, that there needs to be some sort of standard so that people understand, and that, it might be that there's an internal offsetting, there's an internal target and then you've offset, which actually is more like a sort of charitable donation in a way. So yeah, I agree. I don't know what the answer is though.
Absolutely. All right. Well, the final article is one that you picked, and it's a piece of consumer research from Boston Consulting Group. And the headline is "Consumers Want Black Friday 2021 to be Greener." This is a study looking at consumers' shopping plans for Black Friday in 7 markets, including the UK. And they found that essentially consumers in these markets are placing greater emphasis on sustainability as they make Black Friday purchasing decisions specifically, which I thought was really interesting. And I'm so keen to get your take on this, because Black Friday, my association certainly is bargains, right? That's kind of, it's about getting that bargain Christmas gift. So it's quite interesting to see how people square that with wanting to be more sustainability minded. But certainly this study suggests that they are. And sustainable packaging options is a big focus for people. 43% of consumers in that study say that sustainable packaging options influence their purchasing decisions to some extent, particularly younger consumers. And 42% said they pay attention to the country of origin or sustainable manufacturing processes when they make decisions as well. Laura, what stood out to you from this study, and how do you think people are squaring a desire for a bargain, often bought online and therefore delivered, with a desire to make more sustainable choices?
Yeah, I picked this because I actually think it's slightly nonsense. So it's customers, lots of people will say that they are more sustainably minded, they're going to make more sustainable choices this Black Friday. I think people, if they want to grab a bargain this Black Friday, they will do. It just assuages some of the guilt if it can tick a couple of other boxes along the way. And I think it's a really difficult thing to reconcile Black Friday with true sustainability and ethical consumerism. And so that's why I picked the article, really, is that I think you can ask customers, consumers, as much as you want. They'll all say, yes, we will pick some, it'll be a big factor in what we decide. But fundamentally, if a business is really, driven not to drive absolutely massive profit, then should they really be doing a Black Friday deal anyway? And I think, for Seep, it's been a bit different. So we sell, household essential products. And so you either need them or you don't. There isn't a big spike where you suddenly need a lot more of them. And so we've just decided not to do it. We're not doing Black Friday. It just doesn't make sense for us to drive a big spike in demand. It drives stockpiling. And actually it's a really expensive time to be art marketing, to be trying to, buy media space. So all it does is drive a bunch of cost into your business. And so, for a business like ours, we just don't think that it's the right thing to do, a Black Friday deal. And so, I just think it's a bit of a nonsense, and that might be me being harsh. And there's always a need to try and drive sales, but it was a contentious choice, I think.
No, I'm fascinated now, because you've absolutely answered my question. When I said, I'm not quite sure how a desire for a bargain is going to be reconciled, your answer is it isn't. I think I think to me that makes complete sense from your a brand's point of view, to say actually the most sustainable thing we can do here is not to encourage people to spend around one particular day. But it's tough, isn't it? One of the other stats from that study that I thought was quite interesting is I think they're putting consumer awareness of Black Friday in those 7 markets they studied at about 90%, which I thought was very high. So it's, if you have that level of awareness and you're perhaps in a category that isn't like yours, that isn't about essentials, it's a tough call, isn't it, to say, actually, we're going to say no to something that is potentially going to drive lots of sales.
And we might lose a share of market if we don't do that. Yeah, and it is a tough call. I think for single purchase items, so if you are planning on buying a coat, that you're going to be using for years, and you want to get a cut of that Black Friday volume, then yes, you have to do it. And I think some of the interesting, there are some really interesting Black Friday promotions from sustainable brands around, like, if you buy it, we'll give you a little bit of a discount, but actually we'll plant a tree as well. So I think that is a sort of more elegant way, and I guess more in keeping with the way as a sort of sustainable business should think. But I think the kind of jumping onto the bandwagon and drawing that big surge of volume, I think is a pretty difficult thing to reconcile, I think.
Absolutely. Laura, we're out of time. This has been a fascinating conversation. If people want to connect with you and find out more about Seep, what's the best way to do that?
Come and visit us on our website, and we have there's an email address on there which is hello@theseepcompany.com. It's mostly me behind that, so I share it with one other person, but I love, it's one of my kind of guilty pleasures really, is to look at all the emails that come in, and so most of the time it's 50% of the time it's me. So if you get in touch through email, then that's and tell me what you think. And we always love feedback, and yeah, I'd love to hear from people.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show and being my guest.
That's great. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it useful. If you did, please consider giving the Pick List a 5-star rating on whichever platform you're listening, and leave a review. It tells me you're enjoying the show and would like it to continue, and it helps me reach more listeners. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn at juliaglotz.com and on thepicklist.co.uk. And if you'd like more thought-provoking reads for your personal reading list, please subscribe to The Trim, my free weekly newsletter at juliaglotz.com/newsletter. See you next time.